thank you all. I appreciate the invitation to come talk to you today. It worked so well before everybody got in here. There we go. And hopefully it'll stay on. Thank you for the introduction. My name is Paul Coast. I'm actually a former attorney, no longer practicing, doing other things though. One thing, beekeeping. Who would have thought? We have 3 hives in the backyard and one over at a friend's house. So I keep busy doing that. Busy as a bee. That and other things. But I want to share with you this paper. Actually, I wrote it back in March of 2000, so almost 22 years ago. And that was before PowerPoint. That was before all these bells and whistles that we now rely upon to communicate. But I wrote it for a group called the Fortnightly Club, and I'm a member of that club. Fortnightly Club has been around for 125 years, and no, I'm not a charter member, but I am a member, and it's a rather curious organization because it's a group of men who get together and present essays to each other. And again, this works so well in rehearsal. It just wants me to keep going.
We've got a loose connection.
A loose connection. Okay, I know the meaning of that too. Anyway, I wrote this paper for my friends, my colleagues in the Fortnightly Club. Years ago, I asked John Ambrosio to join, but he politely refused. Obviously, he's smarter than I am because he's not up here and I am. So I wrote a paper that was then titled, and this was when Meninger Clinic was still at the West Campus, as it was called. And so I wrote this paper and presented it to my colleagues, and shortly after that, Menninger announced that they were leaving. Apparently they didn't like the paper. But, I hope you bear with me, it's in length, it's not that long, but it takes some time, it takes about 30 minutes. I'm just going to read it, but I do have a slideshow to keep you entertained. And so we'll proceed. What's in a name? Martin's Hill, Cedar Crest, SBA Hill, the Menninger West Campus. These are the names by which the prominence west of Topeka has been known from 1856 down to the present day. Overlooking as it does the Kansas River Valley just to the north, and in the distance to the south, the Wakarusa Valley, this geographical landmark has maintained a close nexus to Topeka since shortly after the founding of our city. Its connection to the Topeka community continues to this day. First, with the construction about 20 years ago of the current Security Benefit Group headquarters. I'm going to need John here to help.
Again?
He's going to hold the connection.
I apologize.
I'll continue on though. This hill has continued its connection to the Topeka community to this day. First with the construction in 2001 and 2002 by the Security Benefit Group of its national headquarters on the site which the company originally began its work with an admittedly decidedly different mission in the first decades of the 20th century. And second, with the recent announcement by FCL Health, current owners of the iconic Tower building, of its intent to move forward with the demolition of this national historic landmark if the property cannot be transferred to someone interested in renovating and developing the building. The precipice upon which the Tower building now sits has been prominent throughout all of Topeka's history, not only for its physical sense, but as an important cultural symbol for the city's founders, entrepreneurs, and visionaries in their attempts to persuade the Topeka citizenry of the great potential for growth and progress existing within their community. I'm going to set this down. Let us spend a few moments then and look back at the imposing hill west of Topeka and its role in the growth and development of the capital city of Kansas. The hill west of Topeka rises nearly 150 feet above the Kansas River Valley and guards the western approach to the capital city. As a prairie landmark visible for miles, it was known to both the Kansas Indians and migrating Potawatomis, with both tribes residing but a short distance from the hill. At the foot of the hill was the old Baptist mission, which was built both to serve the native tribes and to convert them to white man's religion. Early reports from pioneers passing through the area to Oregon and other points west suggest that the hills west of Topeka were at one time barren of trees, with only grass on the summit and possibly a few clusters of oak and walnut along these streams. Perhaps here and there a lone red cedar arose above the native blue-stem grasses. This would have been the scene in the 1850s as travelers made their way west. The Oregon Trail ran along the north plain of the Kansas River Valley, with a crossing at Pappan's Landing in present-day North Topeka being on the main route. Some travelers, however, chose to follow an alternate, less traveled route, which took them to the mission, and that now sits out at the Kansas History Museum, to the nearby Smith's Ferry crossing of the Kansas River. First known as Martin's Hill, the name was derived from the land's original and perhaps most prominent owner, John Martin of Tennessee. Now, Martin was a Southerner and a Democrat who first came to Kansas, who helped to settle the pro-slavery enclave of Tecumseh in 1855. He became involved in territorial and county affairs and was a lawyer and later a judge. When Kansas was admitted as a free state in 1861, the fortunes of Tecumseh declined, while those of Topeka, the newly named capital city, rose. And Martin moved to Topeka. In 1873, he acquired a 240-acre farm located in Mission Township. Later, in 1893, Martin was appointed to finish the term of deceased United States Senator P.B. Plum, becoming Kansas' first Democratic senator, and maybe the last. Martin, I wish I could share these pictures I have with you, but you just have to take my word for it. Martin was obviously more interested in building his political fortunes than in land development and speculation, and until 1887, Martin's Hill remained nothing but farmland. In May of 1887, the Topeka Weekly Capital and Farmers Journal reported, quote, a gigantic deal whereby a Boston syndicate had made a large purchase of land in Topeka, including 240 acres comprising Martin's Hill. Judge Martin received $35,000 for his acreage. Think about that, 1887, 35, that's still a lot of money today, which was no small sum at the time. Other Topekans who sold land to the syndicate included Judge J.B. McAfee, 194 acres for $51,367, C.W. Jewell, 100 acres for $50,000, G.G. Gage, 90 acres for $45,000, and C.F. Kendall, 160 acres for $48,000. The total land purchased was in excess of 1,500 acres for an aggregate price of $520,200 in 1887, $500,000. The newspaper reported that the prime movers of this enterprise are G.F. Parmley, president of the National Loan and Trust Company, and Colonel J.H. Broadus, two gentlemen who, it is well known, have the necessary capital behind them to carry out their undertakings. A reporter from the Topeka Daily Capital interviewed Colonel Broadus, who told him that our syndicate has already purchased over $500,000 worth of lands, and the contemplated improvements in manufacturing enterprises will require expenditures of from $2 million to $3 million. We are confident that Topeka has a bright future, that our city has a solid foundation for steady growth. We have purchased the franchise of the Circle Railway, which has been granted the right-of-way through your city and for a distance of 4 miles to the west of the city, and we propose to begin the construction of the road at an early day. It is the purpose of the company to make a beautiful summer resort out of Martins Hill. A grand boulevard will be built out of the hill and around it, where a large hotel, botanical and zoological garden, and an observatory station will be established, an artificial lake constructed, and other improvements made which will make it the most attractive summer resort of the West. The property was not purchased for speculative purposes, but it is our intention to improve it in the manner I have indicated and to develop it by establishing extensive factories. In short, we are not boomers. We invest because we know Topeka is a growing city. It has everything which goes up to make a great business center. The syndicate membership included Frank R. Cordley, a member of the Boston banking firm of Cordley, Murray & Young, which group was described by a reporter from the Daily Capital as among the wealthiest capitalists in the East. They are known among financial circles to be among the heaviest capitalists in the country, who do not invest their money in Topeka without being thoroughly acquainted with the city. They have examined these statistics, have noted the marvelous growth of the city in population, and have found that Topeka is a railroad and commercial center of the West. The article stated that the total earnings of the banks yesterday amounted to an unprecedented $474,707.16, which is almost double the record made by our city. It is a marvelous day's business, and it shows that after all, Topeka is the greatest commercial center of the West. Kansas City can scarcely compare to it. An article 40 years later in the Topeka Daily Capital reported that the real estate men of today who lay out suburbs, subdivisions, and developments are pikers. There isn't anywhere near in Topeka today, and it is safe to assume that there will not be in the future, any project as gorgeous, pretentious, and evanescent as the dream of the Boston Syndicate, which started out to make Topeka the second Boston of the West. Unfortunately, the Depression of 1890 intervened and laid waste to the grand vision of the Boston Syndicate. Some work had been done between 1887 and the early 1890s before the arrival of the Depression. The syndicate specialized in developing transportation systems and acquired the Beltline Railroad, which ran from the western terminus of the Topeka Streetcar Company just west of College Avenue and 6th Street. While the Topeka Streetcar Company was a horse car line, the Beltline operated a steam locomotive which pulled a small lead-colored cars at speeds between 12 and 25 miles per hour. The Beltline ran west towards Gates Park along present-day 8th Street, went through the center of the park, and terminated at a roundhouse at the foot of Martins Hill. The syndicate also acquired the West Side Circle Rail Line and combined it with the Beltline. They had constructed a hotel and were in the process of constructing a college to be known as Methodist University on the site of the present-day Mount Hope Cemetery. An article in the Topeka Capital appearing on July 11, 1890, page 4, described the following construction work underway at the new Methodist University. The reporter assured his readers that the excavations for the foundations had been completed and that a large force of men were at work. The article also stated that the trustees are determined to build in Topeka a great university of the West. The reporter waxed eloquent. For a number of years, the opinion has prevailed that Topeka affords the best location for great institutions of learning. While it is the political, commercial, and railroad center of Kansas, its healthful moral tone, its controlling religious sentiment, and the absence of evils that exist in other great cities mark it as a place peculiarly fitted to be the home, temporary or otherwise, of young men and women. 400 acres surrounding the campus have been platted for residence purposes, to which the name of the university place has been given. The intention of the Board of Trustees is to make this the most beautiful suburban property in the vicinity of Topeka. Broad streets and avenues have been laid out, which will be parked and planted with rows of trees on either side and cultivated under the direction of a committee on improvements for 3 years from the time of planting. Unfortunately, when the entire Boston Syndicate development fell apart in 1894 with the coming depression, only a large hole where the foundation excavations were undertaken remained. The abbreviated attempt at development launched by the Boston Syndicate between 1887 and 1894 captured the imagination of Topeka during those early years and has become almost legendary as the years have passed. The story is perfectly resurrected by the local news media as a hallmark of the capability of capitalist mentality. Never mind that the venture failed. It was an idea ahead of its time. The 1924 piece in the Daily Capital described the concept as a, quote, gigantic dream, unquote, to make Topeka the Boston of the West. A 1961 article in the Topeka State Journal opined that the big boom envisioned by a group of Boston developers for the Wanamaker area just west of Topeka may be about to blossom. The second piece noted that before the early day development fizzled, Wanamaker had a hotel and a country club, a growing industry in the form of a sugar mill, and a couple of local steam railroads out from downtown Topeka. 100 years after the announcement of the land development by the syndicate, Zula Bennington Crean, also known as Peggy of the Flint Hills, recalled the event in one of her columns appearing in the Topeka Capital Journal and described it as, quote, a marvelous dream that has taken hold of the people of the city in 1884 and mesmerized them in the belief that Topeka was destined to be a great, powerful city extending clear to Martins Hill. The coming depression ended the syndicate's development work in Topeka. The Beltline and the West Side Circle Railway ceased operation, and the developers planned to take up their tracks to salvage the steel in the rails. Local residents, however, obtained an injunction, but despite that, the rails mysteriously were removed at night. The Methodist University building got no further, as I mentioned, than the foundation excavation. The bank holding the mortgage on Martins Hill foreclosed, but the bank even eventually went out of business. Shortly thereafter, Frank Pitts Mclennan obtained title to 60 acres on the east slope of Martin Hill. Of Scottish descent, Mclennan was born in Springfield, Ohio in 1855 and moved to Kansas at the age of 15 along with his family. He graduated from the University of Kansas and found employment at an Emporia newspaper, becoming a part owner in 1880. At a sheriff's sale in 1885, he purchased the bankrupt Topeka State Journal and remained its owner and publisher until his death in 1933. Sometime around 1905, he constructed a log house on Martins Hill, which he intended to use as a hunting lodge. And there's a picture of it. Legend has it that the structure was constructed from telephone poles specially shipped in for the purpose and was roofed with hand-hewed shaped shingles. He named the cabin and surrounding acres Cedar Crest and turned it into a farm complete with a bass pond. The cabin was described as a commodious one with a wide porch extending entirely around it, a profusion of cedar trees surrounding the cottage, the large living room, I think we were there today, with a massive fireplace is the same acme of rustic beauty. Here is a cool retreat on the hottest days, and a big porch is a popular resort for the folks who live in the cottage and for those who in other buildings who come to enjoy its hospitality. Warren J. Newcomer's reminiscence in his historical column appearing in the September 6, 1975 edition of the Topeka State Journal of Mclennan Cedar Crest Hunting Lodge described the structure as, quote, the site of many picnics and parties since the construction 70 years ago. Newcomer noted, however, that, quote, even in the early 20th century, the art of shingle roofing was fading, and the rain poured in on Mclennan's guests, forcing them to huddle under umbrellas. Newcomer noted that the original shake roof was replaced with a more functional one in 1930. Mclennan was not alone in his desire to have a lodge in the country. Many well-to-do Topekans around the turn of the century enjoyed a weekend or country home, often near a river or lake. Frequently, landowners built their rustic vacation homes together, forming the process of a community or communal resort, the best known of these being Lakeview in Douglas County, which had been established along the Kansas River oxbow. Opposite Martin's Hill on the north bank of the Kansas River was a row of cabins called Camp Mattingly. If the country property possessed significant acreage, the landowner on weekends became a country gentleman. A Mclennan contemporary, Thomas F. Duran, a Topeka attorney of note, lived in a grand Edwardian house on Western Avenue, but also raised livestock at Dornwood, his farm east of the Highland Park area. As for Mclennan, a 1912 biographical sketch in Kansas, a Cyclopedia of State History, describes Cedar Crest's life about Mclennan. On this farm, he spends a great deal of his time during the summer months and entertains friends at all seasons of the year. Here he keeps cows, giving his family a supply of pure milk, cream, and butter, raises poultry and vegetables, and finds relaxation from the busy cares of the city. On the farm is a tract of 25 acres of timber, and he has constructed a fish pond of 2 acres in extent, where he raises some fine bass. Walt Mason, an Emporia poet, paid homage to Frank Mclennan at Cedar Crest as follows. The sun was rising in the west and shed its beams on Cedar Crest, where pensive goat and sportive cow were perched upon the cedar bough. There Frank Mclennan watched his flocks and slugged the gentle sheep with rocks and drove his hens to lakelet's brim, that they might dive and bathe and swim. The pigs were climbing elms and firs. The hired man gathered cockleburs. A doctor passed on horse's back, and all the ducks called loudly, quack. The first tree agent asked to stay all night. The horses whinnied neigh. Peace hovered o'er the prairie wide, the cattle lowed, the horses hide, and sounded through the village smoke the bark of watchdog, elm, and oak. And as he owned these rustic scenes, he seeded down his farm to beans. Well, this idyllic spot did not escape the attention of others. In 1917, a Topeka-based fraternal organization, the Knights and Ladies of Security, explored the possibility of establishing for its membership a community farm which would be self-sufficient and which would include a hospital, an orphanage, a school, and a retirement home. The idea was to acquire a location somewhere in the center of the United States so that members from around the country would have equal access to the facility. Cape Girardeau, Missouri, and Topeka were the finalists, with the Kansas capital city being the eventual winner of the competition. In 1918, the society, which had become then the Security Benefit Association, purchased 62 acres of Mclennan Cedar Crest, including the rustic cabin. Now, the concept of the Mutual Benefit Society was the product of the populist wave of the early 20th century. The Knights and Ladies of Security were just such an organization, and it convened a commission to devise a method of providing and delivering health care to its membership. In a sense, the Knights and Ladies of Security and other similar mutual benefit organizations became the originators of managed care in the early 1900s. Although the concept was not labeled as such until the later part of the century. For the Knights and Ladies of Security, the idea for the Knights and Ladies of Security were in the amount of 5 cents per month per member. More more than 50,000 nickels were sent in during the 10 days following the announcement of the society of plans to construct a mutual cooperative farm in Topeka. The facility was officially known as the Knights and Ladies of Security Home and Hospital Association. The farm was marketed to the citizens of Topeka as having a great potential for further economic development for the city, and accordingly a fundraising effort was undertaken by the society directed at Topeka residents. The deed granting the land to the farm to the society specifically recited that the land was conveyed upon the express condition that the grantee, that is the society, shall expend not less than $100,000 in improving the same within 36 months, and that if this did not occur, the society would forfeit the land and also be obligated to pay $32,000, this being the amount of funds raised by the citizens of Topeka for the purchase of this land. The deed was dated July 2, 1918, and thus the link between Topekans and the future mutual benefit farms and its structures was direct. Construction of the farm began immediately and the facility was completed within the requisite time. In 1919, the Knights and Ladies of Security changed the name to Security Benefit Association, and the farm, located as it was at the high landmark west of the city, became known as SBA Hill. Between 1919 and 1928, SBA erected 2 nursing homes, an orphanage, a power plant, a home for the nursing staff, an apartment building for members, a school and auditorium, a band shell, and a large hospital building. The orphanage building was the most visible, being south of the crest of SBA Hill, just opposite what would later become the WIBW studios. For members who continued to pay their nickel a month, they were guaranteed use of any of the services provided at the farm, their only additional obligation being that they had to provide their own transportation to Topeka. In fact, for many years, a train station stood at the north base of the SBA Hill to receive incoming members arriving at the farm. Construction of the remaining buildings followed as the years passed. In 1930, 2 wings and a tower were added to the hospital, making it a replica of Independence Hall. The hospital, later called the Tower Building, became a visible landmark after the 1930 additions and resulted in an increase in the size of the hospital from 40 beds to 250. Modern for the day, surgery suites on the north side of the 3rd floor had ceiling-to-floor windows to allow natural light to be used during surgical procedures. Patients were housed in wards on the east and west wing. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th floors of the Tower Building were used for offices of physicians and for clinic rooms. Atop the tower was a, quote, great clock, which had a 4-dial face, each 12 feet in diameter. It was the master clock, which controlled 14 smaller clocks throughout the hospital. A circular stairway below the clock gave access to it, as well as a view of the panorama of the Wakarusa Valley to the north, Topeka to the east, and hills stretching on to the west. The overall dimensions of the Tower Building were 232 feet in length, 120 feet in depth from north to south, giving a total floor space of 71,800 square feet. The SBA farm was truly self-sufficient. An undated edition of the Security News, the official SBA newsletter, portrayed life at SBA. Not all of the residents on the farm are just folks. A wide variety of life is represented. Perhaps the proudest denizens are our peafowl, as they strut and preen and spread their wondrous feathers in joy of living in this Eden. The pigeons, the ducks, the geese, the turkeys, and the pheasants have their homes. And in their hutches, the rabbit families grow and grow. In the big lake in the woods, game fish tempt the lover of the piscatorial art. While they may not know it, these residents, as they fatten and multiply, are creating food supplies for the tables in our homes and hospital. I think they were talking about the fish, not the fishermen. We have one of the finest herds of purebred Holsteins in the country and are supplied with all the milk and butter necessary for our needs. There are 40 head of cattle in the herd. They have excellent pasturage and are housed in the finest and cleanest dairy barn in the West. We have more than 100 head of Poland China hogs on the farm, and these surely pay their keep in saving the effect in butcher's bills. In fact, nearly all of the milk, eggs, and meats, as well as vegetables used, are produced on the farm. Hay and grain for livestock are raised on the farm. The acreage under cultivation gives fertile yields. About 20 acres have been added to the tillable soil by clearing timber along the river, and some tremendous crops of corn and potatoes are grown here. We also have beautiful young orchards that add materially to the food supply. At its zenith, the Security Benefits Association was comprised of 250,000 members residing in 32 states. By paying their monthly dues, members of the association were entitled to any of the services at the farm for free once they arrived in Topeka. Hospital services were available to sick and injured members. An orphanage for children of deceased members was provided, along with a free school. Aging and retired members could obtain housing. Unfortunately, the full potential of the newly expanded hospital building was never realized, as it was completed during the first full year of the Great Depression. Rising levels of unemployment resulted in loss of monthly income to SBA, which in turn caused curtailment of services to members. SBA, as a mutual benefit association, never fully recovered from the effects of the Depression. Added to that were the changes wrought by World War II to the practice of medicine. Shortly after the war, the first modern health insurance companies began to be organized, which made mutual aid organizations and their facilities even less viable. In 1950, the SBA governing body voted to become a mutual life insurance company and soon discontinued the services available at SBA Hill. In fact, the facility was vacated on what was truly a moment's notice. Several years after closing, visitors to the Hill could still find patient files open on physicians' desks, the operating room ready for the next surgical procedure with instruments laid out alongside the operating tables. The place had an eerie feeling to it, as though a plague or some similar tragedy had consumed the populace all at once. At the same time that the Security Benefit Association was developing its community farm, the Meninger Clinic was founded in the early 1920s by C.F. Menninger, Dr. C.F. Menninger. In 1925, Dr. Menninger and his two physician sons, Drs. Carl and Will Menninger, obtained a $20,000 mortgage for the purchase of a farmhouse and 20 acres on land on the outskirts of Topeka, just east of Gage Park. The farmhouse was remodeled into a 13-bed hospital for the mentally ill. Other nearby buildings housed offices, patient activities, and similar resources. According to a 1982 article appearing in the Menninger Perspective, the small hospital was the fulfillment of a dream. The establishment of a group psychiatric practice in which doctors work together with a common ideal to provide the best diagnosis and treatment for their patients. We had a vision, Dr. C.F. Menninger later said, of a better kind of medicine and a better kind of world. By the late 40s, the Meninger Clinic had reached its capacity at the facility, which had grown up around the original clinic building. Menninger was looking to expand and offered to lease the SBA property in 1954. In 1961, Menninger purchased SBA Hill, which became known as the West Campus. For 20 years thereafter, Menninger provided services at both the East and West campuses. At the West Campus, the building, renamed Niswanger Hall, located on the southeast edge of West Campus, had originally been used to house elderly SBA residents, but became the home of the Topeka Institute for Psychoanalysis. Dr. Carl Menninger also moved his office to the building. The building, which was named Dean Hall by the Meninger Clinic, was originally used by SBA as a nursing home, but became the Menninger Seminar Center. Dean was located in the south central part of the campus near the power plant. The building, renamed Murphy Hall, just west of the Tower Building, was first built as an apartment building during SBA's tenure, but became the center for the Menninger development of education. Clevenger Hall, originally the orphanage, later was used for the Menninger Partial Hospitalization Program, where Kay once worked. Just to the north of that building was a structure which was known as Stauffer Hall, which for years had been leased by Menninger to the WIBW studios. That building originally housed the SBA school. Built by the SBA at a cost of $150,000 $100,000, the school, according to an article published by the Topeka Capital on August 16, 1925, contained classrooms for younger and older students, a manual training room, a library, and an auditorium with a seating capacity for 1,000 persons. After Menninger purchased the campus, the Tower building became the administrative center for Menninger and also the home of the Menninger Museum and Library. In 1982, the Menninger Board of Trustees voted to consolidate all activities at the West Campus and to dispose of the East Campus. A $22 million fundraising effort known as the Campaign for Brains and Bricks was undertaken to build new facilities amidst the familiar red brick buildings, which then constituted the West Campus. The structures, completed at a cost of $35 million, were constructed of whitewashed brick and changed forever the face of the hill. In all, 18 new buildings were constructed among the 8 already existing. These included the C.F. Menninger Hospital with 4 living halls for 166 adult patients, adjacent office buildings for staff members, a 3-building creative art complex including an academic center, wood shop and arts buildings, a horticulture therapy building and greenhouse, a physical recreation building, a new dining hall known as Thornley Commons, to be available to patients, staff, and visitors, and a large conference area known as the Seeley Conference Center. An article in the Menninger Perspective described the overall finished result. The beauty of the site and its sturdy, attractive buildings established several priorities for the design of the new campus. To preserve the natural beauty of the land and trees, to complement existing buildings, and most importantly, to establish and maintain human scale. These values relate to the foundation's concern for the individual and the quality of life. Unlike a college campus or a general hospital, a psychiatric hospital must provide a total therapeutic environment. These priorities were followed through design and construction. The location of each of the 1,280 trees of 57 varieties were carefully surveyed. Wherever possible, buildings were located not only to avoid removing trees, but to use trees to enhance the building design. Fewer than 2% of the trees had to be removed. The overall design of the new buildings is contemporary, simple to construct and maintain. All of the buildings are residential in style and scale. Only 2 have more than 2 floors. The exterior is a brick painted white to maintain a residential feeling and to contrast with the red brick of the existing buildings and the seasonal colors of the landscape. Natural materials used throughout the project, brick, wood, and fabric. Even the ceilings of the building, patient rooms, and covered walkways are naturally finished wood, fir and hemlock. Even the globe streetlights are unusual. They are from more than 50 years old and were obtained from a small southwestern Kansas town at a savings of some $30,000. This article concluded with a look back at the words from a former director of Security Benefit Association. I climbed the hill, and when you reach the top, well, I wish every member of the order could have the opportunity to view the glorious scene that lay before me. The small valley surrounded by its hills seemed to have been made for peace and quiet, and for the very purpose of which it is now intended. It does not require any strain of the imagination to picture our members who are convalescent, sitting in the shade of trees, enjoying the health-giving breezes that roll over the hilltops where they can look over the country in every direction. As had happened earlier in that century, the economics of healthcare delivery began to change in the late 1980s with the advent of managed care companies and healthcare organizations, which represented a departure from the traditional fee-for-service system utilized by medicine insurance companies following World War II. Where fee-for-service provided payment for whatever reasonable charges made by the treating physician or admitting hospital, managed care sought to limit utilization of ever more costly health services and procedures by actually paying doctors more for patients who stayed well. Managed care also undertook to second-guess medical decisions made by physicians, either by refusing to allow the requested procedure or only paying a set amount for authorized procedures, regardless of whether the provider sought to charge more. Menninger, which had become internationally recognized as a mental health facility, was especially renowned for its long-term patient treatment program. However, with the passage of time, the managed care bean counters began to reject long-term inpatient treatment in favor of shorter inpatient stays, or even a mix of short inpatient treatment followed by outpatient therapy. This resulted over a span of 10 years in a complete restructuring of many of the traditional Menninger programs and a concomitant loss of earnings. Accordingly, the Menninger Board of Trustees began looking for ways to save money. Deferring maintenance of buildings was a quick way to stop the bleeding, but over time this took its toll, both on the new and older buildings, but more seriously to the older red brick structures, which are approaching their 8th decade of existence. Ultimately, building maintenance deferment was not sufficient to correct the problem, and a series of job layoffs ensued beginning in 1995 and continuing through 1998. A further reduction in force in 1998 resulted in the elimination of 57 jobs, along with the decision to relocate from 4 of the old red brick buildings, Clevenger, Dean, Niswonger, and Murphy. In February 1999, the Menninger administration announced the decision to raise these 4 buildings. Niswonger, housing the former office of Dr. Carl, was the first to go and was demolished on May 24, 1999. The remaining 3 buildings were demolished during the course of the summer, with Clevenger the last being raised in September 1999. The tower building and the WIBW building, the power plant, and the other structures from the day of SBA Hill remained. However, the former WIBW building was destroyed by fire in January 2012. In 2007, SCL Health of Denver, Colorado, the owner of St. Francis Hospital, announced plans to build a new hospital on the hill and proceeded to demolish many of the remaining Menninger buildings, including those which had been built in the early 1980s. Unfortunately, the Great Recession put an end to those plans, and other than raising most of the buildings, SCL never developed the property. In 2017, SCL announced impending closure of an existing hospital building in Topeka, which was avoided when the property was transferred to a joint venture undertaken by the University of Kansas Health Systems and by for-profit Ardent Health Services. The deterioration of the tower building is ongoing. Water leakage is a serious problem in the tower itself, and it has compromised the structural integrity of that part of the building. The north entrance immediately under the tower has been cordoned off because of concern about pieces of stone actually falling off the tower. Its future is far from certain. Fortunately, the old power building and the adjacent structure that was formerly a dormitory for nurses has been restored by the Sunflower Foundation to house its headquarters and education center. And the future? Well, if the advance of society can be understood through the evolution of these structures, which house the activities of living and working, then the development of 20th century medicine may also be traced to the observation of changes which have occurred in that most important of medical facilities, the hospital. Medicine is certainly not a product of this century, with the concepts and precepts of that learned discipline originating in classical Greek thought, if not earlier. However, the marriage of medicine to technology and the progeny which has emanated from that union is the hallmark of medicine in the last century. The technology-based medical model probably had its beginning in the horrors of the Civil War, and ultimately by the end of the 19th century, the marvels of medicine were expanding exponentially through the connection of scientific research. At the turn of the last century, 120 years ago, surgical procedures were greatly advanced thanks to the discovery of effective anesthesia. The X-ray had been discovered and was being used as a diagnostic tool, and the field of psychiatry was in full bloom. The 20th century may truly be called the century of medicine. The story of SBA Hill is directly associated with this saga of modern medicine as it evolved through the 20th century, where land speculators of the century before failed in their attempt to develop the hill into a resort. The founders of the Knights and Ladies of Security were able to accomplish this task, at least for the benefit of the membership. The medical model which evolved there was holistic. The continuum of care was expansive from cradle to grave. 30 years later, when medicine changed course and SBA reinvented itself to become a life insurance company, the SBA farm was transfigured into a setting for therapeutic psychiatric patients settled among the Kansas hills. The close of the last century saw the unfortunate destruction of those classic old red brick structures, both in the early days of the 20th century as in the last perhaps everything old is new again. Security benefit, no longer a life insurance underwriter, but now a mutual fund powerhouse, returned home, again to reestablish its headquarters on the south slope of the hill where its charter began over 125 years ago. From that vantage point, the progeny of the Knights and Ladies of Security can keep a watchful eye on the tower, its former home, which today stands at the crest of SBA Hill. Thank you. I'm sorry the pictures didn't work because they're worth 1,000 words, so we're going to watch shorter. And I also had a video I wanted to share with you, but you can find it. There's a video that several of us did, including former Mayor Wolgast, myself, and some others who are interested in the tower building. You can find that on YouTube. It's about a 9-minute video on what can be done possibly to save the tower building. So I encourage you to find that. I had it here. I would play it for you, but this isn't working, obviously. And the last thing I might suggest to you, a totally different topic. I'm a member of the Topeka Landmarks Commission, and so I'm obviously interested in historic preservation. And I think you should all be aware that the Docking State Office building may well be demolished or reduced down to next to nothing, maybe a 3-story event center is what they're proposing. So I encourage you, if you think that's a bad idea, to consult your representative or senator and to speak up before it's too late. At the last meeting as well, just for your information, of the Landmarks Commission on Thursday, we took up the question of 3 buildings that are right next to the right next to the new Evergy Plaza. Those 3 buildings are owned by the same company that owns the Cyrus Hotel, and they are looking to find some way to do something with those buildings. They have not been successful. But those structures were built and run by a person by the name of Nick Childs, who was a very prominent black newspaper publisher here in Topeka for over 50 years. And at our Landmarks Commission meeting, we had people we had a Zoom call. We were appearing all by Zoom. We had folks who are descendants of Mr. Childs appearing from Germany, one appearing from New York, to object to the destruction of those buildings. And so if you're interested in saving old historic buildings in Topeka, or you're tired of old historic buildings being demolished, you should look into that and speak up before those buildings are gone. So those are the 2 parting comments that I have, and thank you very much. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have, if there are any. Yes?
So what is the status of the tower building?
The status of the tower building is that the SCL Health, which used to be called Sisters of Charity of Leavenworth, is now based in Denver, formerly owned St. Francis Hospital. They have applied to the Landmarks Commission to demolish the tower building. Now, the Landmarks Commission, again, which I am a member, turned that down, which we have to do. It's on the National Register of Historic Places, and that was one of the documents I had I wanted to show you. But it's on the National Register of Historic Places, and so as a member of the Landmarks Commission has no authority other than to say, no, you cannot tear that building down, because one of the questions is, will it damage or destroy the structure? Well, of course, if you blow it up or tear it down, it's going to damage or destroy it. And that goes without saying. But SCL Health has the ability to appeal that decision to the Topeka governing body, that is the mayor and the city council. And so, in doing so, they can present to the mayor and city council evidence that there is no other feasible alternative but to tear it down. And then it would be up to the governing body to decide whether or not that should be allowed. So they can consider other factors than simply the national laws that protect historic buildings on the National Register. The good news is that we took that question up in January of this year, and SCL Health has not appealed that further to the City Council. Now, there's no time limit, so they could do that next month or next year. They claim, and I take their word at it, they claim they're interested in finding someone who will take the building over. They're willing to give it away. So if you would like it, they will give it to you.
So that's my question, has there been any effort to determine a future use for it, or, you know, we need those guys back in the 1880s or 90s who thought about a resort or something. You know, is there any plans for the redevelopment of that spot, of that building?
I talked to, in fact, we're gonna have dinner with Larry and Anita Wolgaston next Wednesday, but I did talk to Larry about it recently, and he said there is some interest. Now, he didn't go into detail. Maybe he can't, maybe he knows something that is confidential, I don't know, but he did not go into detail. I'm going to ask him more about it on Wednesday night, see what he knows, but they are willing to give it away to somebody who would be, of course, someone who wants it can't just say, well, yeah, I'll take it and then do nothing with it. They have to demonstrate a plan of action to do something with the tower building. But if you go out and take a look at what the Sunflower Foundation did with the old power plant and with the adjoining, which was the dormitory, that's now their headquarters. It's also a beautiful event center. I got to take a tour of it when we did this video back in January. And they'd be happy to give you a tour of it to see what they've done out there. It's absolutely fabulous, and it was done with local, it was actually Swerve Design Group that worked that up for them and did the construction. It's just first class. And you can see it as you drive by. If you look past the Security Benefit Headquarters building, you can see it in the valley up there. And you can see from I-70 that it looks fabulous. So they've taken that, in fact, Billy Hall, she was also one of the participants in the video, and she is the CEO of the Sunflower Foundation. She said it was in worse shape than Tower Building. And she had pictures to show that. So with someone who has vision and has financial wherewithal to take over the Tower Building, they'll get it for nothing, plus the surrounding campus. It's not just the building, and they can do something with it. So talk that up. If you know people who are interested, spread the word.
Billy's right over there.
Oh, there she is. Come on.
I just want to thank you for the rich history that you are sharing. Even I didn't have as much of that information, even though I've been walking the Menninger Hill since I was in my teenager years. And I knew someday that I was going to kind of come back to that space. I didn't know I was going to rescue 2 of the 3 remaining buildings. But your history is just fascinating. And yes, we'd be glad at some point to organize a tour through the Historical Society for you to come up and see. Those buildings were just forgotten. No one thought they were worth anything. And if you've ever driven by lately, you can see how beautiful they are. That powerhouse was completed in 1921, so it's starting its next 100 years, and it definitely has it in there. So thank you. There is still, Paul worked with this group that is a national foundation called the Abandoned Atlas Foundation. Paul did some wonderful work with them on a video, so if you do get a chance to look that up. They care about these kinds of historic buildings that have such a legacy in the history and impact that was for the community that they're in. So I'm hopeful. I'm very hopeful for the clock tower building. I thought that our renovation of the 2 other buildings will make it easier for who's ever coming in to look at investing in that. There are some conversations going. None of us really know for sure what's happening, but we're told there are still some conversations going. So.
Yes.
Is there any discussion of maybe a museum devoted to the the history of mental health and the impact that the Meningers had on
Sure, yeah, sure,
providing
yeah.
mental health?
Yeah, actually, of course, things always work in reverse. So, there it is. I can give you the whole speech now with pictures if you want.
Here at the Abandoned Foundation, we work hard to spread awareness and connect developers to places that are historic and at risk of the wrecking ball. In Topeka, Kansas, the now closed Menninger's Clock Tower is in danger of demolition. Not because there's a lack of interest, but because the right person hasn't been found. To the person with the right plans and intentions, along with certain terms and conditions, this building will actually be donated, along with some additional acreage. This building dates back to 1925 and was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 2005. We are hoping to showcase why this massive building has an entire community of support with people rallying to save it, and why it is ready to be invested in.
The building itself, just by looking at it, commands respect. And it's hard to believe a building like that was built in the 1920s.
The tower is a symbol for everything that happened up here. The symbol of treatment, the kind of treatment that really is not available anywhere else at all anymore. It's been a landmark in Topeka from every direction you come.
What started as Martin's Hill became the focal point for the Knights and Ladies of Security. They had provided insurance and social security for women, the poor, children, and the elderly. By 1895, they had memberships in the thousands, which only continued to grow.
The first premium that were called premiums then, but it was a nickel a month. The nickel a month got you all of the services you needed from a healthcare standpoint. It was cradle to grave.
Because of their success, in 1925, they needed a bigger facility. Constructed of limestone and brick, 4 stories high with a 140-foot clock tower, it was deemed a replica of Independence Hall in Philadelphia. And in 1954, they fell under hard times.
Security benefit was no longer able to meet the needs of their clientele, so they just shut everything down and walked away from it.
In 1959, it was purchased by the fast-growing Meninger Foundation, which had become nationally known for their advancements in research and care of mental health. They had also become the leading educational facility for training psychiatrists in the country, helping Topeka earn the title of Psychiatric Capital of the World.
This was the jewel of this place, that everybody was considered part of the treatment team, regardless of whether you were the psychiatrist, the social worker, housekeeper. Everybody saw the patient, and everybody had a piece that helped understand it, to see the patient as a whole.
And we were known as the place that people came to when everything else failed. So we had people from New York, California, the movie stars. We had a contract with the NFL. Dr. Will, we had meetings with President Kennedy. President Kennedy was very supportive of mental health funding.
By the 1990s, insurance companies began to change their definition of essential care and wanted to save money on treatments. Facilities and programs all over the country began to close as a result. In 2002, Meningers also fell victim. In order to stay afloat, they consolidated with Baylor College of Medicine and Methodist Healthcare System in Texas, leaving the $35 million campus behind. Even though the building has been sitting empty for 20 years, it hasn't been on the market that entire time, and it was only recently put up for donation. It was purchased by the current owners, SCL Health, in 2007 when they had plans to build their new campus on the property and restore the clock tower for their uses. However, in 2008, those plans were put to a halt because SCL Health transferred ownership of its Topeka Hospital, St. Francis, to the University of Kansas Health System, and SCL Health no longer had a need for the property. Several developers since then have looked into restoring this property. However, until now, the clock tower building had never been for sale with the rest of the property. Now, the current owners are holding out on demolition plans in hopes that someone will breathe new life onto the top of this prominent hill. They are so enthusiastic about this that recently they decided to donate the entire building along with some additional acreage to someone with the right intentions and plans.
Now, how often does that happen? To me, that's a strong selling point. You can have this building for nothing.
In an effort to prevent break-ins and vandalism, Right now, the boarded up building is and has been under tight security by SCL Health. They have boarded up all the first and second floor windows, lined the property with a fence, set up alarms, and have kept it under a close eye by hiring security personnel. In 2017, a building assessment was done and repair recommendations were made. In an effort to help protect against further damage, SCL Health spent $147,000 to stabilize the building and make repairs. Moving to the inside, this building offers ample space for a wide range of possibilities for adaptive reuse.
And yes, there are some things happening that over the long haul are not going to be beneficial, but nothing that can't be fixed. You know, it's not falling down, it's not beyond repair.
The blueprints and layout of the building shows over 500 rooms, as well as tall and wide ceilings, giving ample room for an apartment complex, a hotel, office spaces, and other similar ideas. Additionally, the interior has tremendous space for restructuring and opening up floors for conference rooms, ballrooms, and other open spaces. The clock tower building has a huge advantage of being located on the second highest point of Topeka in a very visible and strategic area of town. Right across the street, new neighborhoods are being developed and are seeing new homeowners in residency. It has new nearby construction of 2 banks, a medical clinic, restaurants, a movie theater, 2 TV stations, and a pharmacy. In 2008, SCL Health demolished a majority of the campus to make way for their new facilities, leaving just a few buildings behind. Just down the hill, 2 of them are in the middle of a renovation project by the Sunflower Foundation.
We saw something and we've been at it for a couple of years. These 2 buildings really look like they should have been demolished. The tower building looks better.
They plan to utilize the buildings as a nonprofit center for their new home office and an educational building with conference rooms for other nonprofits. As told by the Historic Landmarks Commission of Topeka, it is eligible for historic tax credits and has the possibility of funding support from the city, state, and community.
The only risk that I see is lack of imagination. It's going to cost money, you know, to build a new structure. It costs lots of money. Why not take what we already have and repurpose it and make new use of it?
Petitions, social media posts, and even a website have been outlets for citizens showing their support and advocating for someone to come in and save the clock tower.
I will do anything I could to support and bring that about. It's right next to Interstate 70. It's not that far that people could easily drive up there. And there will be support if something can be put together that's a feasible project that can bring about the preservation of the tower building. It would be such a feather in the cap. It would be something that we would be very proud of.
The Sunflower Foundation is confident that this hill will soon be full of people, business, and a big part of the growing community.
If you're looking for a chance to build or restore a building into a new model of business, you can't beat the idea of having some land and being on top of a hill. But you gotta think about campus, not just the building. You can develop a campus. And the campus adds to, I think, the quality of whatever services the investor might be doing. What we found here was the outdoors is as important as the indoors. There's a state park directly behind the tower building with trails, and the river is back there too. You're kind of in a pastoral environment. And this is the time to be in Topeka. We're redeveloping ourselves. This is still the gem of the city. Whoever gets that will have their building and their business on the most historic hill in West Topeka, overlooking Topeka, on incredible rich legacy history, and it's right for someone to take it on and make it the next chapter.
If you are interested in learning more or have a strong interest in redeveloping this property, please email board@abandonedatlas.com or call 405-650-0005. Paid for and sponsored by the Abandoned Atlas Foundation. Together, we can save our valuable history.
Okay, I'm glad that worked. Any other questions?
Thank you, everyone.